You get the atmosphere. I mean, I did find it harrowing. I mean,
Did you find it harrowing?
I did.
A black car at Clarence House, a locked case in the boot, pages said to be written in Diana's own hand. The claim is that Prince William ordered the car opened and discovered a secret Camilla's son could not explain. But one detail immediately changes the story. None of it has been publicly verified. The account names guards, private rooms, exact conversations, archival codes, and even a senior palace official, presenting each detail with the confidence of a court record. Yet the story supplies no police report, no palace statement, no court filing, and no identifiable publication supporting the alleged discovery. It even refers to Sir Clive Alden as the king's principal private secretary, while official royal records identify that official as Sir Clive Alderton. The difference is only a few letters, but in a story built on supposed inside knowledge, those letters matter. That does not mean the emotional conflict is invented. Tom Parker Bowles is Queen Camilla's son from her first marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles. He is a food writer and author, not a working member of the royal family, and his public life has generally been built around restaurants, books, and broadcasting rather than palace authority. In June 2026, he and his sister Laura Lopez appeared in the royal box at Ascot, close enough to the monarchy to attract attention, but still outside the official working family. That unusual position makes him a perfect character for a royal mystery, connected, recognizable, and largely beyond public scrutiny. But the car is where the story becomes dangerously effective. Diana died after a car crash in Paris in 1997, and the mythology surrounding her death has never entirely disappeared. Place her private handwriting inside another car, connect that car to Camilla's son, and the objects acquire a meaning before anyone asks whether they existed. The vehicle is no longer transportation. It becomes a symbol linking Diana's fear, Camilla's family, and William's unresolved responsibility as her eldest son. Then comes the second layer. Private words belonging to Diana have caused real royal crises before. Recorded interviews helped Andrew Morton produce his 1992 biography. A handwritten note later released by former butler Paul Burrell described Diana's fear of a planned car accident. Those materials were not discovered in Tom Parker Bowles' boot, but their existence makes a fictional case of diaries and letters sound familiar enough to pass as history. The most successful fabrication is rarely built from nothing. It borrows the emotional shape of something the audience already remembers. And William has publicly explained why that matters to him. After Lord Dyson's investigation into Martin Bashir's 1995 Panorama interview, William said false claims and deceptive documents had played on Diana's fears, worsened his parents' relationship, and helped establish a narrative commercialized for more than 25 years. His words were controlled, but the message was severe. Exploiting his mother through manufactured evidence was not merely bad journalism. It had consequences inside his family. That statement creates the first genuine conflict beneath the headline. If William encountered supposedly explosive material connected to Diana, his most documented instinct would not be to stage a 10-minute courtyard confrontation. It would be to question the source, the chain of custody, and the motive of the person presenting it. A diary can be authentic while the story attached to its discovery is false. A letter can contain Diana's real fears while later interpretations push those fears far beyond what evidence supports. The competitor version avoids that difficulty by giving William immediate certainty. He recognizes the handwriting, reads the papers alone, and moves directly into a palace investigation. It is satisfying because it removes ambiguity. Tom is caught with the case. Camilla's household becomes suspect. William becomes the quiet defender of his mother. But real archival disputes are rarely so clean, and no credible source has established that Diana's private papers were removed from a royal collection, transported by Tom, or recovered by William at Clarence House. The absence of evidence does not weaken the story's emotional power. It may explain it. Tom has spoken publicly about his mother with affection, written about royal food, and maintained a role that is familial rather than constitutional. He has also joked that giving him a royal title would provoke outrage. That comment exposed an uncomfortable truth. Camilla's children can be welcomed at royal occasions, but their proximity to the crown remains politically and emotionally sensitive. For William, that sensitivity is tied to something larger than family dislike. He is preparing to inherit an institution that has repeatedly struggled to separate private pain from public narrative. His mother's words have been recorded, sold, interpreted, disputed, and repackaged for decades. Every newly claimed letter promises one final explanation. Every supposed diary offers access to feelings Diana may never have intended the public to own. So the shocking items in this story may reveal less about Tom Parker Bowles than about the market surrounding Diana's memory. A locked case is more dramatic than an unverified transcript. A car search is more visual than a discussion about sourcing. And a silent William is easier to imagine than a future king carefully refusing to endorse material he cannot authenticate. That is where the public version begins to separate from the deeper story. The supplied account asks us to focus on what was allegedly inside the boot: diaries, letters, and sealed envelopes. The more important question is who constructed the scene around them, why Tom was chosen as the carrier, and why the story introduces a fictional-sounding palace official beside real royal names. Because once that error is noticed, the case no longer looks like evidence William discovered. It looks like a narrative designed for him to discover. And the next detail raises a more unsettling possibility. The secret was never meant to expose Camilla's son at all. It was meant to use Diana's handwriting to reopen a conflict the royal family has spent nearly 3 decades trying and failing to contain. That conflict was reopened not by a proven discovery, but by a detail drawn from real life and pushed far beyond what the evidence allows. Tom Parker Bowles has entered the royal archives before. He said he researched handwritten culinary records at Windsor while preparing his book about royal food. The visit was legitimate, approved, and publicly discussed. There is no evidence it involved Diana's correspondence. But once that authentic detail is placed beside a fictional locked case, the invention suddenly acquires a believable doorway. That is the first partial answer to who built the scene. The story appears to have taken fragments the public can verify: Tom's relationship with the king and queen, his access to royal history, Diana's documented private words, and William's distrust of manipulated evidence, and arranged them into a confrontation no credible source has confirmed. Nothing had to be created from nothing. Each real fragment only had to be moved until the spaces between them looked like proof. Tom's position makes that technique especially effective. He is Camilla's son, King Charles's godson and stepson, yet he holds no working royal office. He has spent more than 2 decades as a food writer, critic, and broadcaster. In 2024, he published Cooking and the Crown after receiving approval to explore that history, and he publicly thanked the king and queen for helping make the project possible. That placed him close to royal records and family knowledge without giving him constitutional authority. He could enter the royal orbit, but he did not control it. Then another contradiction appears. The competitor account portrays him as a silent carrier of dangerous material, yet Tom's documented use of royal history was public. His book launch was attended by Camilla, his father Andrew Parker Bowles, and his sister Laura. Interviews describe the research, the recipes, and his visit to the archives. Secrecy was not the point. The entire project depended on official permission and publicity. A genuine archival connection therefore exists, but its known purpose was culinary history, not the removal of Diana's private papers. That difference should have ended the allegation. Instead, it gave the fiction more power. Viewers who heard that Tom had worked with royal material could easily imagine that he had seen something else. And because archival systems are mysterious to most outsiders, the story could invent authorization codes, missing log entries, and security reviews without immediately sounding impossible. The less the public knows about how royal records are managed, the more confidently a narrator can fill the silence. But William's own history creates a much more serious complication. In 2021, Lord Dyson's inquiry found that Martin Bashir used deceitful methods and false bank statements to secure the 1995 Panorama interview with Diana. William said those failures had played on his mother's fears, worsened his parents' relationship, and helped establish a false narrative commercialized for years. That statement revealed a clear principle: material connected to Diana cannot be judged only by how emotional or convincing it sounds. The method used to obtain it matters. This changes the apparent motive behind the imagined discovery. A dramatic version presents William as desperate to read every hidden page. The documented William has publicly warned that deceptive evidence can distort a vulnerable person's fears and damage a family. If unknown diaries or letters suddenly appeared through an unexplained chain of custody, authenticity would be the first question. Who handled them? Were pages missing? Had the order been altered? Was the material being introduced to inform him, manipulate him, or force a reaction? And that is where Tom's supposed silence becomes useful to the story. A direct denial would close the mystery. A confession would resolve it too quickly. Silence allows every viewer to supply a different motive: loyalty to his mother, fear of William, protection of a palace employee, or knowledge of something larger. Yet no verified interview, legal transcript, or palace document establishes that such questioning occurred. The silence is not evidence. It is a narrative device assigned to Tom. The balance of power, therefore, shifts away from the man in the car and toward the person controlling the story. Tom carries the royal connection, Diana supplies the emotional force, and William supplies institutional authority. The storyteller controls when those three names collide. That arrangement produces a confrontation more satisfying than reality because each character is given a simple role: carrier, victim, and investigator. Royal history is far less orderly. A second interpretation remains. Perhaps the story is not primarily designed to accuse Tom. He may be functioning as the safest possible route toward Camilla. An allegation directed at the Queen herself would demand stronger evidence and invite immediate scrutiny. Her son offers distance. He can be portrayed as acting near the palace without requiring the narrator to explain what constitutional power Camilla supposedly used. Suspicion travels through him and arrives at her without the difficult middle step of proof. That strategy also creates pressure around Charles. Tom has spoken affectionately about the king, and public interviews describe a family relationship rather than an institutional one. But once he is cast as the keeper of Diana's supposed papers, Charles is forced into an artificial choice between his wife's son and William's mother. The title promises objects in a car. The deeper product being sold is another confrontation between the two halves of the king's life. The most important question is now larger than whether the case existed. It is why stories about Diana repeatedly rely on hidden recordings, private letters, and secret testimony to reopen the same family division. That pattern began long before this headline, and one earlier episode showed exactly how private material could move from a trusted intermediary into a global narrative while the palace realized too late what had happened. Once that history is examined, the invented car at Clarence House starts to look less like an isolated rumor and more like the latest version of a method the monarchy has already failed to contain. That method was already visible in 1991, when Diana chose not to approach Andrew Morton directly. Instead, she recorded answers to his questions and trusted Dr. James Colthurst, an old friend, to carry the tapes between Kensington Palace and the journalist. The arrangement was secret, but it had one essential feature the car story lacks: Diana's consent. Her voice moved through an intermediary because she wanted her account heard, not because someone had taken it from her. When Diana, her true story, appeared in 1992, the palace faced a problem no ordinary denial could solve. Morton sources knew private details about the marriage, Diana's health, and Camilla that outsiders should not have possessed. Yet Diana's role remained concealed until after her death, when Morton confirmed that she had been the principal source. The intermediary protected her identity so effectively that the book looked like an attack from outside the family when it was partly Diana's attempt to speak from within it. That history changes the role assigned to Tom. The invented account makes him another carrier of private material, but reverses every important moral fact. Colthus transported recordings at Diana's request. Tom is portrayed as holding papers without permission and refusing to explain their origin. One intermediary helped a living woman tell her story. The other is used to suggest that a dead woman's voice has been captured and redirected by the family she distrusted. That contrast gives the fiction its emotional force. But a second pattern followed, and it was far more dangerous. In 1995, Martin Bashir used forged bank documents and deceptive claims to gain access to Diana through her brother, Earl Spencer. Lord Dyson's investigation later concluded that the methods were dishonest and that the BBC failed to investigate them properly. This time, the intermediary was not simply carrying Diana's words. He was shaping the fears that determined why she agreed to speak. The contradiction could not be sharper. Diana wanted the Morton recordings made, yet the public did not know she had authorized them. She agreed to the Panorama interview, yet the path to that agreement was contaminated by deception. In both cases, authentic words enter the public record through a hidden process. That is why any newly discovered diary, or letter would present William with two questions. Is the material real, and was the story surrounding its appearance constructed to manipulate him? This is where the supposed items in Tom's car stop being the center of the narrative. The more important object is the chain of custody. Who first possessed the pages? Who selected them? Who described them as Diana's? Who placed Camilla's son between the material and William? Without credible answers, handwriting alone would not establish the meaning of the discovery. A genuine page can be selectively presented. An authentic sentence can be detached from the moment in which it was written. Truth can be used dishonestly. William's public response to the Dyson findings revealed how seriously he views that distinction. He argued that deceitful methods had played on his mother's fears, contributed to the deterioration of his parents' relationship, and helped create a narrative commercialized for decades. His concern was not merely that Diana had been interviewed. It was that people and institutions had influenced the conditions under which her private fears became public property. That statement shifted the balance of power. Charles represents the present monarchy, and Camilla occupies its most prominent supporting role, but William possesses the strongest public authority when the subject is Diana's exploitation. He is not simply her son. He is the heir expected to carry the institution beyond the generation that failed to protect her. Any story placing Camilla's family near hidden Diana material pressures him in two directions. Personal loyalty demands attention, while institutional responsibility demands skepticism. Catherine becomes important for a quieter reason. As Princess of Wales, she embodies the future of a title inseparable from Diana in public memory, yet her stability depends on refusing to let that memory become an endless weapon against the current queen. William's household cannot build a credible next reign by endorsing every dramatic allegation about Camilla's circle. It must protect Diana without turning unsupported suspicion into official history. Two interpretations remain. The simpler one is that the car story is entertainment assembled from recognizable facts. Tom's genuine archival access for a food book, Diana's real history of private recordings, and William's documented anger over manipulated evidence. The darker interpretation is that its structure deliberately tests whether viewers will accept invented details when they confirm an existing emotional belief. The first explains how the story was built. The second explains why it spread. Individually, each borrowed element looks harmless. Seen together, they reproduce the pattern that has followed Diana for more than 3 decades. A trusted carrier, concealed material, an institution reacting too late, and an audience told that missing details must be more explosive than the facts already visible. The palace has faced that mechanism before. What it had not faced was a version placing the Queen's son inside the chain. And that made William's next public boundary more significant than any imagined command in a courtyard. After the Dyson inquiry, he did not merely criticize one journalist or one interview. He set a standard for how Diana's voice should be treated, and that standard was about to turn the most dramatic claim in this story against itself. The standard became public on May 20th, 2021, when William addressed the findings of Lord Dyson's investigation. He did not speak like a son chasing another private revelation. He spoke like an heir drawing a line around evidence itself. The BBC, he said, had used deception and false documents, fueled his mother's fears, and helped establish a narrative commercialized for more than 25 years. Then came the decisive phrase, the Panorama interview held no legitimacy and should never be aired again. That statement changes the meaning of the supposed case in Tom Parker Bowles's car. If William believed manipulated evidence had worsened Diana's isolation and damaged his family, he could not responsibly accept newly surfaced letters merely because the handwriting looked familiar. The more shocking the pages appeared, the more important their origin would become. Who produced them? Who authenticated them? What was missing? And why had they arrived through the Queen's son at the moment most likely to provoke confrontation? The imagined courtyard gives William immediate certainty because certainty keeps the drama moving. His documented position demands the opposite. It demands suspicion toward the person presenting the material, the institution that failed to protect it, and the storyteller asking the public to accept an extraordinary discovery without records. That is the turning point. The alleged items no longer function as proof against Tom. They become a test of whether the audience has learned the lesson William demanded after the Dyson inquiry. The consequences of that demand were real. The BBC accepted Lord Dyson's findings, apologized, and faced parliamentary scrutiny over the deceit used to obtain the interview and the failures that followed. Members of Parliament described the broadcaster's reputation as badly damaged and pressed its leadership on governance, accountability, and a culture that resisted difficult questions. Years later, the government's midterm review of the BBC charter still referred to the Dyson affair when discussing transparency and institutional defensiveness. That history gives the Carr allegation a wider meaning. A broadcaster once possessed genuine footage of Diana, yet the dishonest route used to obtain it contaminated the program's legitimacy. The competitor's story offers the reverse, supposedly genuine papers surrounded by an unsupported account of how they were found. In both cases, emotional content threatens to distract from method. William's public boundary insists that method may determine whether the material deserves belief at all. Then the pressure shifts toward Tom. He is a private citizen whose real archival work concerned royal food and was conducted with permission. Yet fiction can transform legitimate access into suspicion, placing his career, family connection, and reputation beneath a cloud he has no formal palace platform to answer. If he denies a story no credible institution has reported, the denial may amplify it. If he remains silent, that silence can be repackaged as confirmation. The person with the least constitutional influence carries the greatest reputational risk. Camilla faces a similar trap. Defending her son could be interpreted as protecting her household from scrutiny. Refusing to respond leaves the accusation attached to her name. Charles would then confront not the invented discovery itself, but the familiar collision between family loyalty and institutional credibility. Any special protection for Tom could appear inconsistent with the standards William demanded from the BBC. Any public distancing could create the image of a king sacrificing a private relationship to protect the crown. But William holds the stronger position. He does not need to order a boot opened or summon an imaginary security review. His 2021 statement already created a public rule. Diana's words should not be commercialized through deceit, and institutions must not hide behind authority when the process has failed. That principle gives him moral leverage over anyone attempting to use his mother's name, including storytellers who portray him as endorsing scenes he never confirmed. The palace, therefore, has two possible responses. The first is containment through silence. That avoids granting legitimacy to an unsupported story and prevents official communications from chasing every viral invention. But silence carries a cost. Detailed fiction can travel further than a careful correction, especially when it includes named officers, private dialogue, and official-sounding procedures. The second response is firmer. Challenge the false details and state that no verified incident occurred. That might protect Tom, yet it would also force the royal household into a cycle of rebuttal. Every denial would reveal which claims attract attention. The palace could win one correction while encouraging 10 variations built around another car, diary, or alleged witness. This is where the story moves beyond one headline. Public trust is damaged when audiences become unable to distinguish reported fact from documentary-style invention. The language of authority, security protocols, archival codes, private secretaries, sealed rooms, can create the appearance of verification when none exists. The more convincing the performance, the less useful palace silence becomes. And the emotional consequence is severe for William. The supposed story casts him as Diana's protector, but it does so by placing fabricated certainty into his mouth and private grief into scenes no source witnessed. It uses his documented anger about exploitation to justify another form of exploitation. A narrative claiming to defend his mother's truth asks the audience to accept invented evidence because it feels emotionally true. That is why the strongest turning point is not the imaginary discovery inside Tom's car. It is William's real decision to reject a famous piece of royal history once he concluded that deception had shaped it. That decision removed the idea that emotional importance can excuse a corrupted process. It placed responsibility not only on the BBC, but on anyone who republishes, dramatizes, or profits from claims about Diana. Yet one question remains unresolved. If the fictional case fails William's own standard, why does it still persuade so many viewers? The answer lies in what happened after Diana's death, when private material, commercial incentives, and public grief became almost impossible to separate. And that struggle would reveal who truly gained influence from keeping her voice suspended between evidence and legend. The people who gained the most influence were not Tom Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla, or even Prince William. They were the storytellers who understood that Diana's voice still carries enough emotional authority to make unsupported claims feel urgent. By placing supposed letters in a locked case, and that case in Camilla's son's car, the narrative transformed uncertainty into suspicion before the audience could ask whether the event had happened at all. That is the central answer. The evidence does not support the dramatic discovery, courtyard confrontation, archival breach, or private investigation described in the account. What it does support is a broader pattern. Real names, historical wounds, and documented royal tensions can be assembled into a fictional sequence that feels credible because every emotional ingredient is already familiar. The immediate consequence falls on Tom. He has no official royal office from which to issue statements, no constitutional role requiring a palace defense, and no practical reason to enter a public argument over a story without credible sourcing. Yet silence can be interpreted as concealment, while a denial risks spreading the allegation further. The accused must choose between amplification and suspicion. The publisher carries neither burden. A second consequence reaches Camilla. Her son's closeness to her makes him useful as a symbolic extension of her household, even though he remains a private citizen. The allegation bypasses the need to prove anything against the Queen directly. It places suspicion near her and allows the audience to complete the connection. That may not establish wrongdoing, but it can still damage reputation because royal perception often moves faster than official correction. Charles faces a different loss of control. Defending Tom could be framed as the king protecting his wife's family. Public distance could look like abandonment. Silence avoids both images temporarily, but it leaves William cast as the only figure supposedly defending Diana. The fictional story narrows the king's choices before he has made any choice at all. But William gains a more complicated authority. His public rejection of the Bashir interview established that Diana's story cannot be separated from the methods used to obtain and present it. That principle applies equally to material that flatters him. A claim does not become reliable because it portrays him as loyal, decisive, or protective. Stories designed to exploit those qualities deserve greater scrutiny because they know exactly which response they are trying to produce. This creates an informal precedent for the future reign. William may inherit a monarchy in which fabricated insider narratives arrive with the language of official procedure, named guards, security logs, sealed rooms, legal reviews, and exact dialogue. The institution can no longer assume audiences will distinguish documentary tone from documentary evidence. Palace communication may need to become faster and more precise, not because every rumor deserves a response, but because detailed invention increasingly competes with verified reporting. Catherine's position also becomes more important. As Princess of Wales, she represents stability in a public space still shaped by Diana's memory. Her role depends on acknowledging that history without allowing it to become a weapon against every member of the current family. The stronger William's future household becomes, the more carefully it must separate genuine legacy from profitable mythology. There are two credible ways to interpret the story's wider meaning. The first is that it is sensational entertainment, a familiar royal family, an invented security incident, and private papers chosen because they promise emotional access. That fits the absence of evidence and the narrative's construction. The second is that the story succeeds because it exposes a real weakness inside monarchy, the gap between what the institution knows privately and what the public can verify. The stronger interpretation combines them. The Carr story is not evidence of a palace conspiracy. It is evidence of a market that rewards the appearance of secret access. Diana remains commercially powerful because her story still feels unfinished to many viewers. William remains valuable because he can be positioned as the son who finally corrects the past. Camilla's family remains useful because they provide a living connection to the marriage that divided public opinion. The narrative does not need a genuine discovery. It needs unresolved emotion arranged in the form of one. The long-term cost is public trust. When real inquiries, authentic recordings, memoirs, documentaries, and invented transcripts circulate together, accurate reporting becomes harder to recognize. A legitimate future revelation about Diana could face greater skepticism because audiences have encountered too many fabricated versions. The opposite danger is equally serious. A false account may be accepted because it resembles a true one. The boundary between evidence and performance becomes the institutional risk. One uncertainty remains. It is impossible to know how often senior royals privately encounter false claims before they reach a wide audience, or which stories they decide are too marginal to answer. What can be observed is the public strategy. Official silence remains common, while William's strongest intervention followed a formal inquiry that established institutional wrongdoing. That suggests a high threshold for response, but the digital environment may make that threshold harder to maintain. The next test will come when another supposed letter, recording, diary, or unnamed palace source appears with a claim tied to Diana. Royal observers should watch not only what the material says, but who authenticated it, how it surfaced, and whether any reputable institution accepts responsibility for reporting it. Those questions will determine whether the next discovery belongs to history or merely borrows its appearance. And the same struggle is not limited to Diana. Across the wider royal family, private relationships are repeatedly turned into public evidence, while titles, access, security, and silence are treated as clues to hidden battles. The car may never have existed, but the method behind the story is already moving toward another royal figure whose public image depends on the distance between what the palace confirms and what the audience is prepared to believe.